Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Janice Lo. Here's a look at tonight's top stories. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wraps up her Beijing visit, describing talks with officials as constructive. The new boss at the Hong Kong Sports Institute says athletes these days can no longer slack in academic studies. And Japan's Nasa Hataoka is on the verge of winning her first major golf title. The U.S. Treasury Secretary said that hours of meetings with her Chinese counterparts helped put a floor under the turbulent Sino-U.S. relations. Concluding her Beijing visit, Janet Yellen added, "The world is big enough for both countries to thrive." Chloe Feng reports.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen declared that her four-day Beijing visit had borne fruit, describing the meetings as direct, substantive, and productive. Yellen said the talks had brought Sino-U.S. ties closer to a surer footing. Apart from Premier Li Qiang, the American monetary chief also met her counterpart He Lifeng and the incoming Chinese central bank governor Pan Gongshan. Her trip has brought hope that the two superpowers were finally ready to mend their relations. The two sides have been engaged in a tense trade war, with tit-for-tat moves, including sanctions and export restrictions on key technologies and raw materials.
We know that a decoupling of the world's two largest economies would be disastrous for both countries and destabilizing for the world, and it would be virtually impossible to undertake. President Biden and I do not see the relationship between the U.S. and China through the frame of great power conflict. We believe that the world is big enough for both of our countries to thrive.
At a meeting, the two sides have significant disagreements. Yellen claimed the Beijing officials acknowledged her argument that diversifying critical supply chains was not the same as decoupling. In return, Beijing raised concerns over an unexpected U.S. executive order restricting outbound investment. And Yellen assured her counterparts that any such measure will only target sensitive sectors involving national security. She also raised the importance of ending Russia's invasion of Ukraine and urged Chinese firms to avoid providing Russia with material support or means to evade sanctions. Yellen is the second official from Biden's cabinet to visit China in 3 weeks, following Secretary of State Antony Blinken's tour. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry is also expected to visit China later this month to see how Beijing and Washington can find more common ground on tackling global warming. Chloe Feng, HKIBC.
In Hong Kong, the chairman of the Sports Institute says that elite athletes in Hong Kong are getting 5 times more funding than their peers a decade ago. Tan King-shing is also confident the SAR will be able to host the Asian Games one day.
In the 2 months since quietly assuming the role as chairman of the Hong Kong Sports Institute, Tan King-shing has met industry stakeholders to promote elite sports development in the city. He revealed a decade ago the government only injected $200 million into a development fund for elite athletes. That fund has now ballooned to $1 billion. The former police commissioner clarified that being an athlete in Hong Kong does not mean they have to give up their studies.
He
said that the Sports Institute emphasizes on dual career development in sports and education. All athletes at the institute must complete secondary studies, and around 30 schools have agreed to provide a flexible schedule so these students can undergo sports training. The trade-off, however, is that they may graduate later than their peers. Even tertiary institutes are making accommodations. 49 outstanding athletes were admitted into local universities last year, despite failing the entrance exams. Tang also set his sights to boost Hong Kong's standing as a sports hub. The SAR was beaten by Doha in its bid to host the 2006 Asian Games. And while Sports Minister Kevin Yeung said the government will only consider making another bid after 2025, Tang was confident the city's chances will be bigger this time. He pointed to the sprawling sports park in Kai Tak, of which he is the director of the managing body.
With the Kai Tak Sports Park completing its construction end of next year, there will be a major composite sports facilities available in Hong Kong then, which is much better than what Hong Kong had when Hong Kong first wanted to host the Asian Games previously. So put Hong Kong in a much better position.
The park, which opens next year, will play host to a number of events for the National Games in 2025. Another sports park is planned in Ma On Shan, but few details have been published so far.
The Innovation and Technology Minister assured the public that their personal data are in safe hands under a plan to facilitate cross-border data transfer. The SAR government has signed a memorandum to foster data exchange within the Greater Bay Area. The regime could benefit banking, healthcare, and other sectors. This is despite the mainland imposing greater restrictions on data export last year. Speaking on radio, Sun Dong stressed that under the agreement, the personal information of SAR residents will continue to be safeguarded by privacy laws in Hong Kong. He revealed that governments on both sides of the border are setting up a joint task force to iron out the details in the coming months. Rescuers in central China are racing against time to look for 7 people who remain missing after a massive landslide. Days of heavy rain plus the soaring temperatures are blamed for the landslides, which occurred yesterday at a highway construction site in Yichang City in Hubei province. 5 people have been rescued from under the rubble last night. Another 2 were found this morning, one of whom had no vital signs despite resuscitation efforts. 7 others remain missing. Tens of thousands of people have been taken to shelters amid heavy flooding across China, while other areas have reported droughts or a prolonged heat wave. Some cities are allowing residents to escape the punishing heat by hiding at underground shelters used for air raids. Overseas, Washington's decision to supply Ukraine with cluster bombs has raised concern among its allies, including Britain. The weapons could be key to Ukraine's counteroffensive, and it marked 500 days since the Russian invasion. Raymond Young reports.
As Volodymyr Zelensky wrapped up his short visit to Turkey, the Ukrainian president went home with a few more passengers on his plane. In a mute video published by his office, Zelensky was seen exchanging hugs and greetings with Ukrainian commanders at the tarmac of an airport in Istanbul. The 5 men were part of more than 2,000 people who surrendered at a port city of Mariupol last year, following a prolonged battle with Russian forces at the Azovstal steel plant. Some of them were freed in a prisoner exchange last September, but as part of the deal, they had to remain in Turkey until the war ended. Their sudden release angered Moscow, which said it had not been informed by Ankara beforehand. The commanders were then flown to Lviv, where they reunited with family members while receiving a military guard of honor.
Slava Ukraini!
Zelensky described the men as heroes and applauded their bravery in defending Mariupol. In another video to mark 500 days since the Russian invasion began, the president was filmed paying a visit to Snake Island. The tiny island was captured by Moscow in the early days of the war, before Ukraine regained control. Zelensky said the island is proof that Ukraine will eventually reclaim every part of its lost territory. The United States is helping that cause by providing another $800 million of military aid package. But among the latest delivery are cluster bombs, a controversial weapon which could inflict massive damage to civilians even long after the war ended. The munitions are banned by more than 100 countries, including Britain.
The UK is signatory to a convention which prohibits the production or use of cluster munitions and discourages their use. We will continue to do our part to support Ukraine against Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion. We've done that by providing heavy battle tanks and most recently long-range weapons.
Sunak will be meeting US President Joe Biden, who was seen relaxing on a beach in Delaware ahead of a trip to Europe. Raymond Yang, HKIBC.
On to the weather now. Monday will be sweltering. Temperatures will range between 28 and 33 degrees. The very hot weather will persist for the rest of the week. Now let's take a look at the weather around the world. That's our main news for Sunday night. Join us for more news at 11. I'm Janice Lo. Thanks for watching. Good night.